You need to see this bombshell story finally released by the mainstream media. Dr. Fauci backed controversial Wuhan lab with millions of US dollars for risky coronavirus research. You won't believe this. Just last year, the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the organization led by Dr. Fauci, funded scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and other institutions for work on gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses. What a coincidence. Many scientists have criticized gain-of-function research, which involves manipulating viruses in the lab to explore their potential for infecting humans because it creates a risk of starting a pandemic from accidental release. The NIH research consisted of two parts. The first part began in 2014 and involved surveillance of bat coronaviruses and had a budget of $3.7 million. The program funded by Shizhang Li, a virologist at the Wuhan lab, and other researchers to investigate and catalog bat coronaviruses in the wild. This part of the project was completed in 2019. A second phase of the project beginning that year included additional surveillance work, but also gain-of-function research for the purpose of understanding how bat coronaviruses could mutate to attack humans. The article goes on to talk about what the project proposal stated. In layman's terms, spillover potential refers to the ability of a virus to jump from animals to humans, which requires that the virus be able to receptors in the cells of humans. SARS-CoV-2, for instance, is adept at binding to the ACE2 receptor in human lungs and other organs. According to Richard Ebright, an infectious disease expert at Rutgers University, the project description refers to experiments that would enhance the ability of bat coronavirus to infect human cells and laboratory animals using techniques of genetic engineering. In the wake of the pandemic, that is a noteworthy detail. Yes, it is. Ebright, along with many other scientists, has been a vocal opponent of gain-of-function research because of the risk it presents of creating a pandemic through accidental release from a lab. It's worth noting that Richard Ebright, you can see on his Twitter or in the press, that he actually thinks it's a possibility that this was leaked from a lab, yet Facebook and US Today try to fact check my articles and say, we quote Richard Ebright, but we don't think that this was man-manipulated from a lab. Well, that's great, and their fact checking was so sloppy that after I exposed them, they had to change it from false to partly false because they don't know what they're talking about. But it's interesting to note that's the same scientist that they try to use against me in this article. Fauci defends this type of research that Richard Ebright and others didn't want to happen. And this article went on to say the work in question was a type of gain-and-function research that involved taking wild viruses and passing them through live animals until they mutate into a form that could pose a pandemic threat. Let's read that again. The work in question was a type of gain-of-function research that involved taking wild viruses and passing them through live animals until they mutate into a form that could pose a pandemic threat. It gets crazier. Scientists used it to take a virus that was poorly transmitted among humans and make it into one that was highly transmissible. A hallmark of a pandemic virus. I mean, my gosh, how could that go wrong? Besides everybody who warned him. Let's go on. The work entailed risks that worried even seasonal researchers. More than 200 scientists called for the work to be halted. The problem, they said, is that it increased the likelihood that a pandemic would occur through a laboratory accident. Dr. Fauci defended the work. I'm sure he did, blah, 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 blah. Nevertheless, in 2014, under pressure from the Obama administration, the National Institute of Health instituted a moratorium of that work, suspending 21 studies. 3 years later, though, in December 2017, the NIH ended the moratorium and the second phase of the NIAID project, which included the gain-of-function research, began. The NIH established a framework for determining how the research would go forward. Scientists have to get approval from a panel of experts who would decide whether the risks were justified. The reviews were indeed conducted, but in secret, for which the NIH has drawn criticism. In early 2019, after a reporter for Science magazine discovered that the NIH had approved 2 influenza research projects that used gain-of-function methods, scientists who opposed this kind of research excoriated the NIH in an editorial in the Washington Post. "We have serious doubts about whether these experiments should be conducted at all," wrote Tom Inglesby of Johns Hopkins University and Mark Lipsitch of Harvard. "With deliberations kept behind closed doors, none of us will have the opportunity to understand how the government arrived at these decisions or to judge the rigor and integrity of that process." So when they say the science is settled, you have to listen to the experts, just know there's experts at Harvard, Rutgers, and Johns Hopkins who completely disagreed not only with what they were researching, how dangerous it was, and the obvious possibility that it could in fact create a pandemic, But they also didn't agree with the fact that the review was being conducted in secret. Isn't that just insane? Can anybody say conflict of interest? The guy driving our policy and leading the health experts, of course they have Brad Pitt play him on television. Everybody loves Brad Pitt, right? But nobody in the media or in journalism seemed to be doing their job and asking the proper questions, which clearly would have started with, what's going on in Wuhan lab with the coronavirus in bats? Instead, the mainstream media and social media decided to be a cover-up organization of sneaks who censored, silenced, and tried to put fact checkers on anybody smart enough or with enough integrity to do the research that they not only don't do, but cover up themselves. But there's so much brainwash, propaganda, and nonsense filling the minds and souls of American people that this type of obvious bombshell will likely fall by the wayside. And while that's happening, ABC7, 7 high-risk sex offenders released from Orange County jails. DA's office issues community warning. These kinds of high-risk sex offenders are the most dangerous kind of criminal and the most likely to reoffend, the district attorney said. Some include child molestation, assault, battery, criminal threats, and inflicting injury on an elderly adult. They can get released, but in some states you can't go to the beach and you can't even go to your neighbor's house without being yelled at by the police in some cases. I would love to hear the science on that logic, but they don't really have any. All they do is scream science while they ignore science and cover up any real science or scientists who disagree with them. Make sure you share this video and spread the word. Have a beautiful day, and I hope you learned something from this video.